Welcome to Lighten Up TV, enlightening, inspiring, and empowering humanity. This is a journey of self-discovery. On this journey, we are in search of answers to the burning questions that have intrigued mankind for millennia. Who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? By merging scientific discoveries with spiritual revelations, we will explore the possibility that mind and matter are one and the same in a vibratory field of pure consciousness. What if this eternally expanding field of consciousness is of and from the same source? These revelations, that we may actually share one mind in a unified field that expands into the cosmos, has the potential to cause a powerful shift in the collective consciousness. On our fascinating journey, we will explore ancient legends, modern discoveries, and emerging truths about the spiraling creative forces that spun this creation into being. From spirituality to religion, superstring theory to the Big Bang, from gods and goddesses to angels and aliens, we will dive into the mysteries of creation. Are you ready to lighten up?
Starring your host, Suzanne Ross, television personality and producer, inspirational author and speaker. She is a 5D truth seeker and spiritual pioneer on the front lines, raising the frequency of humanity. Through her shows, books, and events, she has dedicated her life to activating the matrix for global ascension.
Hello and welcome to Lighten Up. I am your host, Suzanne Ross, and it is truly an honor and a privilege to be here today with Tricia McCannon. Tricia is a world-renowned clairvoyant who has performed over 6,000 readings with clients worldwide. As a historian, cosmologist, and researcher, she has traveled the world in search of answers to the greatest mysteries of our time. As a hermeticist and a mystical symbologist, she is an initiate of many advanced systems of knowledge. As a ufologist, she started the UFO Forum in Atlanta. She is also the founder of the Phoenix Fire Lodge Mystery Schools and a bishop in the Madonna Mystery Schools. Tricia has 13 online books and over 35 DVDs and courses on her website, TriciaMcCannonSpeaks.com, and 4 phenomenal books published through Inner Traditions: Dialogues with the Angels, Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and Ancient Mystery Religions, The Return of the Divine Sophia, Healing the Earth and the Lost Wisdom Teachings of Jesus, Isis, and Mary Magdalene, and finally her latest book, Angelic Origins of the Soul, Discovering Your Divine Purpose. So, Tricia, you have been a very busy girl over the last several decades, and bless you for dedicating your life to healing, uplifting, and enlightening humanity.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it takes one to know one, my darling. So it's a pleasure to be with you and our listeners today.
Thank you so much. And I would just love to go through your phenomenal books in the order they were written, because they really do tell a story about how you got started and introduced to this beautiful world of spirit beings and angels and archangels and ascended masters at a young age, and how that really moved you into Jesus and the mystery schools, and then of course the Divine Sophia, and now Angelic Origins, and where you're at now. So let's take a journey through the life of Tricia McCannon and start with Dialogues with the Angels.
Oh, well, you know, in all the hundreds of interviews I've ever done, I've never had anyone ask me to do this in this order. So it's going to be an interesting journey for me as well. I think like a lot of children, I was very tuned into the world of nature. And I think that the more we can allow our children to be tuned into the world of nature, the more they make that connection with the divine. And even as adults, if we think about how it shifts our consciousness to go camping, for example, or to go spend a weekend at the seashore, or to actually go be in nature, it allows us to kind of come back into that stillness of who we truly are. And for me, I grew up across from a great forest. It was outside of Atlanta, about probably 35 minutes outside of Atlanta. And that forest still exists today, although a section of it has been cut away for two very lovely homes. But fortunately, one of those homes was a landscaper, and so he preserved the rest of the forest, which was great. And it had a creek running through it. And like a lot of people, I sort of have one of those great American dysfunctional families, you know, where there were really good things in the family, but there were things that's like, I think I'd rather not be here, you know. And so where some people today might go into their video game world, we didn't have that option then, or they might do drugs or alcohol to try to escape or something. For me, I spent time in the forest. And this was profoundly healing. It allowed me, of course, to move into a state that we would think of that's akin to meditation, although I didn't think of it like that. I was just in that still place of connection. And so when I was about 8 years old, I began to see these sort of translucent elemental energies that are really the guardian angels of the plant kingdom. And they were, you know, they're kind of human, but they can take different shapes. It could be a little blobby or a little skinny, or, you know, they kind of take the form basically of the plant that they're serving. Mm-hmm. And they were very surprised that I could see them. And so I don't think most humans do see them. And so they wound up telling the overlighting angel of that forest that I was there, I was coming there. And he came and he appeared, you know, like as an equivalent of about a 6 foot human man, but you know, radiant with light. He was translucent. He wasn't, you know, solid like we are. And he had, you know, wavy hair down to his shoulders, more brownish. He began to explain to me about how the light and sound of the divine are stepped down like a funnel from the big to the more dense and small. And that's where we are here. We're in the denser worlds. As vast as our universe is, you know, they think they found, 300 billion galaxies, and our galaxy alone has 100 to 200 billion stars. This is the small version of the end of the funnel. And he explained to me that it was all vibration. And of course, later I was to discover that this is called the great chain of being within the ancient theosophical or philosophical paths, where the light and sound of God, in the beginning was the Word, we hear that in the Bible, are stepped down vibrationally so that everything in that particular plane or dimension vibrates essentially, at least molecularly, at the same level. And this is why, you know, it's hard for me to put my hand through, you know, this lamp, okay? Because even though we can like to think my consciousness is higher than the consciousness of the lamp, at a molecular level, we are, you know, on the same frequency. And this is why a lot of times we can't see ghosts, because ghosts are people that have dropped the physical body and they have an astral body, but that is very ethereal to us. And most people aren't tuned in to see at that level. Of course, for ghosts, it's very frustrating for them because they can't eat, no one notices them, no one hears them, you know.
Hungry ghosts, I think they say in Buddhism.
Creatures, the hungry ghosts. And they're probably hungry for attention.
Yeah, right.
So, very frustrating place to be. So, this made perfect sense to me. And there are certain things I realized about him. I realized that on one hand, he was like much more connected in a way in terms of his omniscience to the grid, the galactic or the universal grid. In other words, he would be able to perceive or receive signals from other angelic beings or other spiritual beings or other human beings that we would be oblivious to. But at the same time, he wasn't as complex as we are. He didn't have the complicated emotional body that we crazy humans have. He certainly was intelligent. He could think, but our mental body is as beautiful an instrument as it is. It's weighs, it judges, it analyzes, it criticizes, but it only can do about 3 or 4 things. The angelic kingdom, those beings, even if they're on assignment in the 3rd dimension, they have a soul body that we get in the 7th dimension, and a spiritual etheric body. And so they are perceiving in a direct transmission, and they're able to transmit vast amounts of knowledge, instantaneously. Where with the linear mind, it's like step 1, step 2, step 3, and even though it's a beautiful vehicle, it's a more limited vehicle, the mental body. So he didn't have that level of complexity. He was able to transmit entire concepts to me, like holistic thought bubbles, within just a very short period of time through direct transmission. And of course, as masters become masters, we hear like masters of the Far East that students literally will go and just sit near the master because their presence becomes transmittive. Okay. So this is very similar because those masters are beings who are like on a trampoline. They're jumping up and holding this higher consciousness, even though they come back down and have to eat and sleep like the rest of the humans. So this made perfect sense to me. And I began to have a presence walk and talk with me as I went through the frustration of some of the things that were going on in my family. My dad was a very brilliant lawyer. He had been a military man. He was very much a self-made man. He was very strong and so forth. But he had a massive stroke when he was 37, and his whole left side was paralyzed. And so he fell, unfortunately, like many of the men of his generation, into drinking. And he endured the horrors of World War II, the Korean War. And, I think that in order to, if you think about what those wars were about, it was pretty horrible for the men and the people that lived through it. So they were encouraged in the officers' club to drink. It was a social thing. And also to smoke cigarettes. That was like very popular back then. You could look at the movies in the 30s and 40s, and all the men and all the women have these crazy cigarettes. And we all know now that this causes lung cancer, but hey, it was cool at the time. So my dad, of course, was a man of his generation, and he fell into that. And to his credit, he went on to be a very brilliant lawyer and to support our family for many years, but at a great personal cost for himself. And I think the drinking is how he sort of anesthetized. There wasn't Prozac back then, himself. And so that had a very bad effect on the family because we got the worst of him. His clients probably loved him as a hero, but we got the worst. So I, of course, would rant and rave to God about the unfairness of life and suffering and all the things that I saw that his drinking was causing for my mother, my sisters, and myself, and so forth. And so this presence began to walk by my side and begin to counsel me. And it was a very deep, divine presence. And it would never allow me actually to see its head. And years later, he did allow me to see his head, which was the head of an eagle. And, of course, I think he probably thought I couldn't have handled it at the time as a child. But this was actually one of my great guides. And I think of him as an expression, really, of the Divine Father energy, and incredibly wise and loving and deep. And I'm not the only person that's actually seen this kind of expression. Socrates had a guide that had an eagle's head. I think Carl Jung had a guide that had an eagle's head. And so it's quite possible. Now we hear in the UFO community that there are these fifth dimensional beings, blue beings that are showing up that have these eagles' heads.
The avians, yes.
The bird so,
reminds me of Egypt, though, all the bird beings in Egypt, right?
Horus and Ra and Osiris.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
exactly. Those had the ibis head. So I think it's quite possible that there really is a race of higher dimensional beings, whether they're able to shape shift and look human, but they're more comfortable in that form, like we're more comfortable in this form. I don't know. It's still part of the great mystery, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yes, I mean, we're in the mystery, and we're trying from our human point of view we experience these profound things that are outside of what we know in our society, and we try to, like a puzzle, to put the pieces together. And there's some things, we just have to remember and put on the back burner, and then you run into evidence that other people have experienced this, and you go, oh my goodness, there must be something to it. So
what a beautiful blessing for you, though, to have this divine being in your presence as a guide, but also just as a loving, fatherly energy to help you through these times.
He was, and he would always ask me questions. I'd be ranting and raving and, just like anyone angry. And he would ask me questions. Well, why do you think your father drinks? Oh, well, because he's suffering. Well, why do you think your father is suffering? Oh, because of this, and these questions would lead me back to compassion and forgiveness over and over again. And so that was the thing, was for me to understand from an empathetic point of view why someone becomes, an addict or an alcoholic or does things that are harming other people and harming themselves. And so I think that pain, we can either become bitter and closed, or we can become open and more compassionate. And he wanted me to go in the second direction, which is, of course, the direction that I went, and thank goodness for that. But I did a lot of praying growing up that someone wiser than myself, a master, a teacher, would show up. I remember reading my first book about the masters when I was 13, and it was about these incredible yogis in India that bury themselves alive for 6 months and then come out of the ground, and people who lay on beds of nails, and people that levitate, and people that walk through walls. And I remember my mother said, "You don't really believe all that stuff, do you?" And I said, "Yes, Mother, I've seen it for myself in past lives." And of course, I had memory of a lot of my past lives, and as you can imagine, this was kind of a little difficult. My dad was Baptist, my mother was Methodist. We became Episcopalian, and here they have a child that's talking to fairies and divas and angels. And of course, I knew to keep a lot of this to myself, but my mom was very astute herself. She was a mystical Christian who later went on to have a born again experience, did speaking in tongues for a few years, did healing, and she was very private about it. She never did it for a living. Only people that she actually was doing the healing with knew about it. She actually did it on me twice when I had the flu, and I woke up the next morning totally healed. So there was something genuinely going on with it. So anyway, when I was about 19 years old, I was at school at Florida State University, and a group of masters appeared to me. I saw this poster that said "The Voice of the Master." And it was on the campus, and it was an evening presentation. And for some reason, that name, The Voice of the Master, just pierced my heart. Like, I have to go to this. And I had a film history class that night, so I was late. I got there in the last 30 minutes. And I remember someone had a God Worlds chart of the dimensions up on an easel. And I remember seeing it and going, oh, my God, at last someone has a map. I didn't have a map, and I had been traveling in my dream state to all these different places. One night I'd be up in, the higher worlds with these masters. The next night I was down in the bowels of the lower astral plane, and it was like, where is the map, and how do I control my gift? And so somebody in the audience was asking, could you be a Christian and soul travel? And these people taught soul travel, how to travel. And of course you can be a Christian and soul travel. You can be in any religion, because the great religions of the world, although they have an exoteric moral level, like don't lie, cheat, steal, or kill, they have an inner esoteric teaching that is actually very profound and beautiful if you know how to find it and get to it. And that's, of course, what Jesus was really teaching, what Buddha was teaching, all these great avatars have been teaching the inner teachings, but a lot of people aren't ready for the inner teachings. They
it's
just
like the mystic side of the religions. Don't you agree? It's like Jewish mysticism is Kabbalic, and you just mentioned, Catholicism has a mysticism behind it. And so if you can get behind the dogma and look deeper into the mysticism, then you start to get to the esoteric.
And then the Sufis are the mystical aspect of the Muslims.
Yes.
In fact, the Sufis are persecuted by many of the Muslims and Islamic because, Islamic is very patriarchal, but the Sufis revere the divine feminine and the heart. Mm-hmm. And so, over and over again, as we go into the center, we find the divine feminine. And we find the sacred marriage of the masculine and feminine in union, not the heavy hand of the patriarchy that we can observe a lot of times in the outer face of religion, that's really created a lot of war and bloodshed for people. But the inner teachings are there if you know how to find them. Unfortunately, in a lot of churches where you have really good intention people doing important things like helping rebuild a village, build a house, give food to the poor. I mean, they're really doing wonderful deeds, but they don't have the tools because the minister, who could be a very good-hearted person, was not taught those tools. I mean, he's doing the best he can, struggling with how to make sense of the Bible and the Old and New Testament, but a lot of the inner tools were taken out of the teachings. Like, since we have the Nag Hammadi text and the Dead Sea Scrolls, I know I'm jumping around here, but the Gospel of Thomas finally came out. And the Gospel of Thomas gives us beautiful spiritual technology tools of Jesus' teachings about how to balance the two sides of the brain in order to open up the third eye in order to see the kingdom of heaven, or the inner plane, so to speak. It's just different words for the same thing. And, of course, those were taken out, those Gospels, out of the traditional New Testament. So,
can we pause just for a second on the brain balancing that you just touched on, because I don't want to forget about it, and it's something that is just so powerful. You demonstrated this way that you learned to place the left hand on the back of your head and then your right hand above your skull, and then to tap on it, and then to move to the heart and tap, and then to move your hand to different parts of your head. And as I did that, it was just so profound. And of course, I was really intentionally connecting those two hemispheres of my brain with my heart as I did it. And at the end, I felt naturally compelled to look into my third eye. Like that opened my third eye. So that's how I then end the practice. And ever since I saw you demonstrate that, I've been doing it daily, seated in my shrine, and it's been really powerful. So maybe you could share it with the audience.
Yeah, this is a great thing, and it's particularly good for veterans, because veterans, people who've been in car accidents, who've fallen, a lot of times they jostle the brain and they don't realize that. Bombs, guns going off, I mean, mamma mia,
Yeah.
And so what happens is we're meant to live our life with the whole neural net. But when we have a fall or an accident or a sudden shock or something, parts of the brains can kind of turn off. And if you think of it almost like when you see those pictures of the United States or Europe that's got the grid all in blue with all the electrical wires, imagine if half of the power went down in the country. Okay, that's what happens with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what we want to do is get the whole brain turned back on so that these wonderful veterans who come back from war have all of their facilities to be able to rebuild their lives. Many times what happens is the masculine brain, which is the left brain, the right side of the body, because it crosses over, is what's left on. And the masculine side is great for a lot of things. It's a good analytical brain. It's good organizing. It's a good protective brain. But it's like a warrior patrolling a fort. He organizes the fort beautifully, and he patrols, and if he sees any danger, he shoots it and kills it. He's able to work within known parameters, but he can't think outside the box. He can't come up with new creative solutions, okay? The feminine brain is the exact opposite. She's creative, she's fun, she's emotional, she's, open. She'll probably open the gates, tell them to come in. She probably has the fort, decorated in a million colors. She's creative, fun, emotional, not very logical at all, intuitive, but she's able to think outside the box. She's able to come up with a new plan for your life. So instead of trying to go back into the life you had 2 or 4 or 6 years earlier, where you had no injuries, the masculine brain is beating on the walls in fury, anger, and frustration. If the feminine brain isn't there to help it say, hey, don't do things the old way. We have a whole new plan for you in your life. You're meant to be an artist, or you're meant to be a rehab specialist, or you're meant to be go into computer sciences, or, we have a new life for you. Don't try to repeat the old patterns. So the male and female need each other. If we just have her, she's going to be fabulous, disorganized, fun as can be, but ungrounded. If we just have him, he's going to be super grounded, logical, critical, analytical, and frustrated. Okay, so we really need each other, and we need both sides of our brain. So this process is very easy, and I would really encourage any of you that are watching this to feel free to pass it on to anyone that's in stress, anyone that's fallen, whether they're an old person, a young person, anyone that has an addiction problem. They may be just trying to anesthetize themselves or self-medicate because they're frustrated. So the idea is that you use your left hand to cross both hemispheres, the left and the right, through the middle median here, which is called the corpus, I think it's callosum. I always forget if it's corpus callosum or callosum.
It's callosum, yeah. Great.
Callosum. Thank you so much. And so there, of course, we have the back of the head here. Next position would be here, the next is here, and then the next is here. So you put your hand in the very back position near your spine, and you spread your hands, and you tap on both hemispheres like this, and you breathe. The breath anchors it in, and so the tapping is across both hemispheres, turning the lights on, okay, and the one that's crossing both sides is telling both brains, hey, pay attention, both of you, we're here. And then you tap your heart and you breathe. You have to remember to breathe to anchor it in. So this connects the left and the right, the head and the heart. And then you just move it to the next position, repeat, breathe and anchor it, breathe and anchor it with the heart. Then you move the left hand up to the next position, repeat, then the heart. And then when finally you come up to the forebrain here, the cerebral brain, the logical brain, you just reach behind.
Okay.
That's how you do it.
Okay.
And then you do the heart. So the whole idea is basically that both hands are talking to both sides of the brain. And you can, and the way I found this out is because I fell a couple of years ago, broke my left foot. I was down for about 4 months without being able to walk well. And I sprained both my wrists, and I got post-traumatic stress disorder. And I had a girlfriend at the same time, Debbie Unterman, a wonderful hypnotherapist who here in Atlanta, who broke her wrist the week before I did. And it was in a bowling alley, and there was insurance. And so she was going to every therapist in the book. I was going to no therapist because I wasn't dealing with insurance. And the doctor said, you have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was like, I thought that's something Vietnam vets got. And he said, no, it's about the brain. And as soon as she said it, I saw it because, I am a clairvoyant. And so I was like, well, lay down, Deb, and I will adjust your brain. But I didn't have anybody that could adjust my brain because I didn't know this exercise. So one of my wonderful clients, I'm a clairvoyant, but in order to do my work, I have to really be able to have both sides balanced to access the inner planes. And so I told all my clients, until I'm in balance, I'm not doing readings. So one of my clients said, I have this amazing exercise. Let me tell you about it. I started doing it within 1 week. My brain was totally normal. I was doing it 2 or 3 times a day. Just takes a minute. And then I started writing a novel. In the next 3 months, I wrote a 500-page novel, okay, which isn't published yet. So I was like on it. So I would say it totally works. And it's a great
totally
process.
Works. And I think it's important to mention that too, that the PTSD can happen to anybody, and it can be the loss of a job, it can be a breakup, it can be a physical injury. You know, it doesn't have to be something really extreme. But this can rebalance you, and I would really recommend that anybody does it, whether you think you have PTSD or not, because things happen to us over the course of our lives that get stored within the memory of ourselves. And so we don't know how much of our right or left brain, our masculine and feminine energy is imbalanced at any time. And so I would recommend that anybody do it. And also, I heard in an interview you say that some doctors had actually used it on patients who were in a coma, and it actually brought them around.
Exactly. Because in a coma, what happens is the soul's trapped between dimensions. It hasn't gone all the way up, and it hasn't come all the way back. And so by rebalancing the brain, then it's like turning the lights on in the house. If you only have 10% of the lights on, okay, it's like there's not much incentive to come back. So, you know, you're just literally turning the electrical system on in the brain. So, yes, thanks for mentioning that. There's a bunch of exercises that I've learned and taught through the years. There are ones on grounding, helping you to become present. And this is very useful for clients of mine that come to see me for, you know, healings or for readings, and they've been in traffic for 30 minutes and they're stressed out and barely even in their bodies, okay? Or if you're in jet lag, there's some very simple ones that can ground you and get your spirit more in your body. I do a lot of emotional clearing work with people aside from the clairvoyant work I can do on the phone or in person. The healing work I actually have to do in person. But there are ways that I can help rewire the brain so that traumas that have been laid into the brain, either from this lifetime or even that are stored in the subconscious from past lifetimes, we can change those traumas. What I've found really with all this is that whenever we have an injury, it's about a loss of power. Now, the power might be coupled with our innocence, our sexuality, our ability to speak our truth, our ability to create, our ability to make money. It depends on how it's linked, what were the events around it. But what happens is then we experience this loss of power, which affects our auric field, and these frequencies leave our field. And so part of the process of healing is to get the frequencies back in the field so that manifesting money or relationship or a job or whatever, you can magnetize that to you and attract what you want in your life. And so you can't just go and get the frequency and bring it back. You have to find out why the frequency left. What is this wounded part of you? Were you imprisoned? Were you tortured? Were you jilted? Were you lied to? What happened? And then you have to heal that part, and then that part will willingly come back, and it's a healed portion now, and then the frequency will stay. And that's one of the challenges that I find with traditional soul retrieval, that a portion will come back, but a portion will not stay. In other words, some part may stay, but unless you heal that part that's wounded, unless you find out what it is that happened that created the I don't want to be here anymore, okay, I'm never going to trust love again. The last time I had a job, they put me in the corner and with a dunce hat on and treated me terribly. Or the last time I spoke up, I was shot down. Or as soon as I got up there to sing, and I had a screechy voice, it was a trauma, okay, or whatever the trauma was. We all have these traumas. And as Carolyn Mace would say, we all have at least 3 major betrayals in our lives. And so those betrayals can cause us to form certain belief systems. Like it's not safe for me to be who I am, or it's not safe for me to follow my dreams, or, everybody that has money is terrible and evil, or, whatever the belief system is. And of course, we then will attract events around that belief system. And, and one of the belief systems that we've inherited, unfortunately, from these Abrahamic religions is that either you pick a life of spirituality, chastity, poverty, and obedience, or you can pick a life where you have money, a mate, family, partner, and so forth. And it's in either or, and that's not true. Of course, we can have a spiritual life, a life of service. We can have a mate, wonderful mate. We can be successful and prosperous. We can support ourselves. We don't have to be pitiful and codependent, So these we have to heal that. That's like the left and the right sides of the brains. It's the same thing. Either we're in the masculine world amassing power and success and money and sex, or we're in the feminine world going after God. They are not mutually exclusive. It's a crazy thing, but we've inherited this for thousands of years, basically, and we're having to try to break that spell. So Dialogues with the Angels is my first book, which is, the masters, the fairies, and the last third is actually my beautiful guides and what they begin to teach me about the nature of creation. And it's an easy book to read. A lot of people tell me that they read it and they start over all from the beginning again because they don't want it to end. And it only takes about a day or two to read it because it's it's big print. Yep. Unbelievable. And I love the pictures. And so I did a new edition of this book a couple of years ago, added 75 pages and about 30 pictures. This is an easy, fun book to read. It's a great bridge book, even if you come from a very traditional, place. There's a lot of choices about what you can do next. I usually tell people to read Return of the Divine Sophia next, because this is also a story. And this picks up when I'm about 26, 27, and I'm invited. I have this amazing dream that I have been contacted basically by the priestesses of Isis. I dreamt that I had gone back to school for my master's degree, and I woke up and there was all this extraterrestrial symbol language on the walls. It was kind of like Egypt, but not really quite. It was like different. And when I woke up again, I tried to remember the symbols, but I fell back asleep. And when I woke up, all the symbols were gone, but I remembered one, which was a circle with a dot at the center, which somehow I knew meant the end of all things and the beginning of all things, like the Alpha and the Omega. But I didn't even know how I could possibly even know that. So it was like, so I went to the library to see, because I like research, if I could find some reference to it. And while I was there, the student assistant came and got me and said, "There's a phone call for you at the front desk." And I was like, nobody even knows I'm here. How can there be a phone call? So I go and I pick up the telephone. I will just do props here. I pick up the phone, and I'm like, except it was a corded phone in the library. And I said, "Yeah, who is this?" This is Tricia McCannon. And this woman said, "We've called to tell you that your dreams are real." And I'm like, "What? Who is this?" And she said, "That's all. We're from the priestesses of Isis. And that's all we're permitted to tell you at this time." And then she hung up the phone. And then I woke up, and it was a dream within a dream with obviously two messages, the symbols and the priestesses of Isis. And I'm like, who the heck are they? Some ancient Egyptian cult or something? I just had no idea. And so about 2 months later, in the real physical third dimensional world, I had gone to lunch, and there was a line, a wait. And so I went down to this beautiful gift shop called Illumina here in Atlanta. And it's closed now, but it had thick carpet and beautiful Egyptian statues and gorgeous jewelry and crystals. And I was looking at this Egyptian statue, the goddess Ma'at, which is cosmic truth. And this woman behind the counter who worked there said, "Are you interested in Egyptian things?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been dreaming of the priestesses of Isis." And she said, "Oh, tell me your dreams." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure you're going to understand my dreams. I'm not even sure I understand my dreams." And she said, "Try me. I'm a high initiate in the priestesses of Isis." And this was to become my shaman teacher.
That's divine synchronicity right there, my friend, for you to walk into that store after your dream and run into a high priestess of Isis, an initiate. I think you referred to her as a hierophant.
Hierophant. She's the real deal. And Shasta Zarine, who is still very much alive and still very much my friend, and always will be a teacher for me. I love her very much. Shasta invited me to her home, which was this magical cottage in the woods, and it was on maybe 10 acres. And behind her home was this incredible forest with where prayer work had been done for, as she said, 10,000 years. Now that's a long time, but I can tell you there were prayer ties and statues of the goddess and as Mary, Kuan Yin, all these different expressions, Aphrodite, and there were prayer ties, and I could feel the earth humming. I could just feel the power of the land. And I spent the day with her, and the truth is it totally shifted my reality. I mean, talk about transmittive energy. She has so much transmittive energy. And she's very quiet and soft-spoken most of the time. I used to tease her that she was really a dragon, so she could kind of purr, but then if she was mad, she could, one little flick of her tail, she could just scald you. So she was not the easiest teacher, but a powerful one. And I'll be forever grateful for her. And so, some of the things she told me, for example, just shifted my reality. I did not even realize that I was patriarchally identified. I kind of thought I was above that or beyond that or whatever. I mean, we all know God's not a male. God is beyond gender. God is the divine, but it's taught to us in Judaism and Christianity and the Islamic Abrahamic religions as God the Father, God the Son. How did they give birth? I mean, men do not give birth, and neither do sons. I mean, women give birth, okay? But it never had occurred to me, to be honest with you, and I never had realized that I had absorbed certain beliefs about, men should be superior because, after all, Adam was created first and Eve was taken from his rib. Well, that's actually not true. That's a made-up story. I hate to say it.
It's quite insulting that we were just created from an appendage, yes.
Yeah, well, the rib's probably a better appendage than some appendages, but all right.
Almost as an afterthought, right? To be in service to the male who so generously lent us his rib. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And that women were supposed to suffer with their periods because they had, they were
the curse.
Eve ate that first,
dirty.
Okay? Never mind that Adam ate the apple too. Okay.
Right.
No, she gets all the blame. Okay. He gets all the credit. She gets all the blame. So I hadn't really realized that when I'd heard these stories in childhood, I had internalized them. And so, I always thought I was more sort of strong-willed and independent, and I can do whatever I want to do than a lot of women. But there was a part of me that had really internalized these stories and identified, to some degree, it's like, oh, is that what they've been teaching us? And we are supposed to accept that? That doesn't seem right. Particularly when I discovered from Shasta, and I have done the research in biology to discover that this is true, that all mammals are created biologically female first.
Mm-hmm.
All. That's not just humans. Every mammal of every species, the male is actually a subset of the female. The male exists because of the release of an additional androgen. And I actually back that up in my footnotes in my book with biologists that have come forward since the 50s and told us this. So in other words, what we were being taught was just, I hate to say it, but a lie. They should have said in the beginning was the divine feminine, and the divine masculine was created as a subset of the feminine, okay? But, are women out there saying, like gorillas, I should be the king of the jungle? No, they're not, They're saying, let's be partners. Let's be equals, because as souls, we have come in as both male and female, and both have their part to play, and both are equally as valuable and precious. So,
I think that's one of the biggest things I got out of your book, Tricia, and I just wanted to say that when I picked up your book, The Return of the Divine Sophia, I couldn't put it down, and it's all I did for 3 days was just read, because it opened my eyes to so many things. And, the main thing beginning with the universe is birthed. Naturally the universe is birthed through a female womb. And I like to think that it's an infinite womb, that, we're all existing within this watery womb of the Divine Mother who brought through the Trinity.
Space is like, we're like literally in the body of the mother. We're in this gigantic bubble, which is how many billions of galaxies? We have no idea. But these galaxies are like cosmic eggs floating in the plenum of the cosmic sea. The sea is the mother, and and so of course there is a masculine and feminine aspect of the divine, but this was a huge shift for me, and I realized at the end of that afternoon, which is my second chapter in this book, that my guides really wanted me to study with her, but I was a scaredy cat. I was already studying with the Viragi masters. I was already meditating, and I was already into UFOs. I mean, I was already into things that from the point of view of my family, I was already on the leading edge of like, she seems to be sane. She has a successful business as a photographer, but she believes all these strange things, So I was like, oh no, not one more thing, So it took me about 5 years for Spirit to lead me back around, and a lot of things happened in that period of time. But one of the things that happened is because I'm a clairvoyant and I was doing readings for people, I began to see people's guides, and in some cases they were overlit by these, let us say, magnificent god or goddess energies. And so the people themselves began to sort of be expressions of that level of wisdom or that level of love or that level of creativity. And they gave me their names, and they gave me their symbols and their powers. And one of them I had heard of, Aphrodite, but I'd never heard of any of the others. And then I found this amazing book that I have up here on my shelf. It's Barbara Walker's Encyclopedia of Myths and Women's Secrets. And it's really a dictionary, about 1,200-page dictionary of all these gods and goddesses and many other things throughout the ancient world. And she's really done the footnotes and the history. And I take my hat off to these wonderful women that were forerunners, that were part of my mentors. And Barbara Walker's certainly one of them. I don't know if she's still on the planet today or she's in her 80s, but it's a major encyclopedia, and it's one that I think it's good to have in any library. But anyway, I found these gods and goddesses, and it was exactly as I'd seen them, and even more. And I thought, how is this even possible that I'm seeing these beings I've never heard of, that they were known historically, and there still seem to be interactive presences. And so the only person I could think that would know some of these answers was Shasta. And so I finally met with her and said, it's time. And so she convened a circle of 12 women, and we began to learn. And so this book, Return of the Divine Sophia, is that shamanic journey of my discovery, and then, of course, should say something. And because I have a very analytical lawyer's daughter's mind, I'm like, what? I didn't learn that in Sunday school. So I would go and do the research to find out what was true. And so you have the research that's done for you here, where I take a look at some of these, myths that we've been taught, and I really go back and find out what actually was true. And then, of course, we return to the circle. So in a way, you're learning left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. So it sets up this activation in the process of reading the book.
I really like how you ground the information for people, because it doesn't just validate it, but it also makes it more real for them, more tangible, so that they can reach out and touch it too and experience in that way. But I do really feel like, validating that information with the research behind it just really helps for people to understand that this is not mythical, magical, this is real information. This is the truth of who we truly are. And the mystery schools, taught all of this knowledge and activations and initiations for millennia before the patriarchal religions came in. So very powerful.
At least 4,000 years before Jesus, and all the way to the end of the Neoplatonic schools, which would have been around 400 AD. And the Neoplatonic schools were attempting to merge the wisdom of the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Persians, all the great mystery schools with the teachings of Jesus. And they worked just like this. Okay, they were not like Jesus over here murder and kill everybody else. That may be what we've been taught by the church, or fear everybody else. No, it was like, Jesus was working within natural law. His miracles were what we call miracles because we don't understand the natural law that he was working with. And of course, his frequency was so high that he was able to perform amazing things, from really walking on water, invisibility, healing, raising the dead. These are all, as Jesus would say, these things I do, you too shall do, and even greater, telling us that we have this capacity within ourselves if we achieve that Christ consciousness. Well, what is Christ? It means the anointed one. Anointed is, there's so many different meanings, but initiated is to be anointed. If we reach a high enough level of initiation, a high enough vibration, as he said, when you make the two eyes into one eye, the inner into the outer into the inner, that means the inner worlds and the outer worlds, the male into the female and the female into the male, then you shall see the kingdom of heaven. He was teaching us the spiritual technology for accessing these inner planes. And this leads me to this book, which is the actually my second book. And this book, I was actually writing this book, and it wasn't in the shape it became, but it was about the mysteries, and I had put in 3 little chapters on Jesus because I happen to love Jesus. Here's Jesus. I was like, here's Jesus. And no, I wouldn't call myself a born-again crazy Christian, okay? I would say that I consider him to be an incredible expression of the divine, a manifestation of the divine, who came to earth to show us how we can also live into that.